We pretend death doesn't exist because many of us are gut-wrenchingly terrified of it.
This is probably going to be a really unpopular video. I fear the dislike button and how many people are going to press it. But I'm not going to be talking about my insecurities today or those trivial statistics that so often consume me. I'm going to talk about something we all fear. Because, I don't know, this COVID thing has got me really thinking, like, our culture really fears death. More than most, it seems like.
So why are we so afraid? Is this disabling dread from our cultural habit of avoiding dying or dead people in the hospital, the nursing home, or the funeral home? Is it because people of all ages have gotten used to such advances in medicine that we expect modern healthcare to save us from death, even in the face of terminal or aging diseases, even when all is futile?
Americans are so obsessed with youth and triumphing over every challenge they face that they become afraid of aging, and death often seen as life's ultimate defeat. But if you open your eyes and you look back in time and you look around the world, I think you will find a very different worldview. Take Asian culture, for instance, Hinduism. Cezanne Thran wrote, "The concept of karma conveys that suffering is part of life. Suffering can be positive if it leads to progress on a spiritual path. It's seen as testing and learning from difficult experiences. What may appear to be needless suffering to Western minds may be in fact a striving to meet death in a clear state."
The belief in reincarnation gives great comfort to the dying and their families because they believe that their loved ones will be reborn into a new life, that the death is not the end. So enduring suffering and pain may result in a higher sense of spirituality and a sense of spiritual growth, which will in turn lead to a more fortunate rebirth. So what they do is they call their funerals wakes, and they dress in white, and people bring fruits and flowers.
Here in America, we have this thing called the prosperity gospel, where suffering equates to lack of faith. And so we strive for having more money, more wealth, which are the outcomes of being blessed.
Take a look at us in the West here. Take a look at the East. Here we are in Canada and North America, amongst the wealthiest continent in the world. Look at the irreligion we have here. Look at the blatant atheism we have here, the blatant repudiation of God. You go to a land like India, which for decades has lived with so much deprivation, and the greatest amount of the hunger for spiritual truth is in that country. So prosperity does not necessarily beget spirituality. Prosperity, in fact, can oftentimes beget this kind of autonomy and a sense of we're self-made people. So when we do go through a trying time, it may be God's megaphone. Some of the greatest saints have suffered some of the greatest hurts and come out with some of the greatest comfort. It is God's extraordinary way to bring us to the mountaintop after the valley.
Now, it wasn't always this way. In the Victorian era, Americans were much more open and accepting of death and its inevitability. Infant mortality rates were so high that mourning was a very acceptable and open affair when people were pregnant. Just in the 1900s, life expectancy was 50 years of age. 3 things happened to us. 1, we got really advanced. We discovered cures and treatments to diseases. We were able to fundamentally extend one's life. The life expectancy now is radically prolonged compared to just 100 years ago. 2, we got really rich. We realized how amazing life could be, how pleasurable the experience, the potential for wealth and status. This amount of satisfaction was unprecedented. Then we got really scared. Nietzsche said it first. He said, God is dead. When there's no next life for us to rebirth into, like the Hindu, when no higher being grants us salvation into an existence of eternal bliss, when there's no spirit world for our spirits to inhabit, death gets really, really sad.
In the United States, the end of life has become so medicalized that death is often viewed as a failure, rather than as an expected stage of life. The surgeon Atul Gawande, he says that this medicalized view of death frequently results in people dying in institutions, cut off from their loved ones and comforts. I am in a profession that has succeeded because of its ability to fix, he writes. If your problem is fixable, we know just what to do. But if it's not, the fact that we have had no adequate answers to this question is troubling and has caused callousness, inhumanity, and extraordinary suffering.
And then COVID happened. An unprecedented disease struck, and we didn't know what to do. Our culture, being so used to having a treatment and a cure for every disease, all of a sudden was thrown into mass hysteria and chaos. Life all of a sudden became a whole lot more uncertain and fragile. We shut down the economy, shut down our borders, people stayed indoors, no one ventured outside. We feared the unknown. I am in no way approving of euthanasia or saying we should have behaved any differently. I, for one, would love for the ones I love to stay here on Earth for as long as possible. I just found it interesting, the change of tone, where originally it was simply flatten the curve so that we don't overwhelm the healthcare system, because we have no idea what we are dealing with. The conversation has shifted to stay locked down, don't go outside of your house until a cure is found. I just found that interesting and maybe symptomatic of a society that is void of spirituality and unaccustomed to the suffering and the pain that most of the world has had to deal with and most of history has had to come to grips with.
Is it because we don't talk about death in conversations with our children? I ask you, by keeping the sad truth from our youth, trying to make life easier for them, are we instead filling them with the fear of death? Isn't it true that the fear of the unknown is almost always worse than something familiar? Death is a strange thing. Most people live their whole lives as if it doesn't exist.
So, what do we do about it? I mean, I think that for one, we should talk about it more. I think people are a lot more open to spiritual conversations than what one might originally think. I mean, I've heard it said there are two guarantees in life, death and taxes, and we sure as hell talk a lot about taxes. We should talk about death more, because if we understand what somebody believes about death and the life or lack thereof afterwards, then we can better understand why that person lives the life that they live.